Hi, welcome. It's great to see you to this Wednesday bite-sized session. Yesterday evening in our Zoom live group, we shared communion together, and that was a novel experience, doing that in our own homes. But as Dan reminded us last night, communion is a time of remembrance. Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." There are many occasions in Scripture where acts of remembrance take place. They remind us of past acts. They help us not to forget. They bring the past into the present and allow us to move forward into the future with greater hope and assurance. Time and time again, there's stories recounted of how God brought the Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt. Moses reminds the people of what God has done on many occasions, and Joshua too follows on with this pattern when they get to the promised land. It became a story that is passed on to their children, to their children's children, to future generations. And briefly, what was that story? It was the story that God had chosen them to be his people, that God had determined in his heart that he would be their God and that they would have covenant relationship with him, that he loved them, how he worked miraculously to set the people free by sending plagues on Egypt, that in all this God did not allow the plagues to come near the Hebrews or their livestock or their crops or their homes, how they were untouched by death as they celebrated the Passover, how they were set free from slavery and miraculously passed through the Red Sea, how God protected them and guided them in the wilderness by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, how he provided manna for them to eat and water to flow in desert places, how he gave them the law to live by and prosper in, how he faithfully brought them to the promised land, how he defeated the enemies before them. The story was always told. It was always recounted, a time of remembrance, to commemorate, to celebrate, to pay tribute to God. The story is captured in the Old Testament, but it was and still is dependent upon people to tell the stories to others, to the future generations. In Psalm 44 verse 1, it says this: "We have heard it with our ears, O God. Our ancestors have told us what you did in their days, in days long ago." We are currently experiencing a few weeks and possibly months of disruption to our lives, and we may still be living with the consequences of COVID-19 in a year's time. But I wanted to ask you a question. What will you tell your children, your grandchildren, your neighbours and friends about this time? Will you tell of the hardship, the supermarket queues, the isolation, the inconvenience, that you were unable to see or be with family, that you were unable to worship and meet in church? Will your story be a tale of woe, or will it be a testimony to God? Will you tell a story that when we went through COVID-19 crisis in 2020, we stood firm in our faith, in our resolve, that we encountered God in a new and powerful way, that we came out of this stronger and more fervent in our love for Jesus and the gospel and for others? Is this the story that your children and grandchildren, is this the story that you will tell your children and grandchildren and that they will tell to others about you? Some years ago, I attended a management training course, and at the end of the course, the organisers had to write a postcard to ourselves that would be posted to us by them 6 months later. The postcard was to contain words of encouragement, to ask ourselves if we were still applying the principles learnt on the course, and to inspire us to carry on. When that postcard dropped through my letterbox 6 months later, it was really nice to read what I had written to my future self, what I was thinking, and the encouraging words I had used, and it did spur me on in my efforts. So, I want to encourage you to write a letter to your future self from the here and now in the realities and experience of COVID-19. You see, in a year's time, we may have forgotten all that we've been experiencing, so I want us to capture that now. I want it to be an act of remembrance, a personal record. That letter doesn't have to be too heavy. It can be fun. Write it to yourself as a friend. You might want to include some of the following in your letter to your future self. Tell yourself how you've been spending your time, what jobs you've been doing around the house or in the garden, any favourite TV or radio programmes you have been watching or listening to, Any YouTube channels or ministry channels you have been connecting into that have blessed you. Tell your future self how you've been feeling, what you are missing the most. Share what God has been teaching you. Tell yourself how precious God has been in these difficult days. List the things that you won't take for granted anymore. Explain the ways that you've remained connected with others, what you have learned from this experience, what you've learned about God and yourself. Write down your hope for the future as you go forward. List 3 things that you are most excited to do when all this is over. Make a list of the people you can't wait to see again, perhaps places that you want to visit. Maybe a word of encouragement to your future self in terms of your faith and ministry. And include a photograph of yourself too in this time. I think it would be a therapeutic exercise and a great blessing. Then put it in an envelope with a stamp on it and give it to someone and ask them to post it to you, say in 6 months or a year's time. I'm sure that when that letter drops through your door, you will be thrilled to read what God has been doing, and it will cause you to worship God and thank Him for His goodness and His faithfulness in these difficult times. An act of remembrance to God. Keep safe and may God continue to bless you.